remember from yesterday, because there are some new people who were here, and I think your reflection is going to be helpful to them also, and also it's going to be helpful to all of us, so we know where we are, how much did we remember, and what we remember, and that itself will bring us to connect. That's one of the wisdoms of asking every time you have a group, you have a training, you have anything that goes on one day after the other, when you ask everyone what they remember, it's not just that they are sharing their memory, but really connects everybody together. So we become a cohesive group. So that's the secret. That's the secret of it. One of the secrets. So what do you remember from yesterday? Okay.
Yeah, just real quick, listening to the children this morning, singing their prayers, it kind of reinforces what Heather was saying about how important it is that children at such a young age are getting those neural circuits developed with the writings, becoming such an integral part of their identity, which becomes a little harder as we age. So it's just, it reinforces that whole concept.
Exactly. What else do we remember from yesterday?
I think what you have on the
Star.
The star, yes. The different facets of who we are, and be conscious of those facets, that they are all components that make up who we are. So if I'm only conscious of my five senses, and maybe my thoughts, maybe my feelings, which I think most of us operate in that quite comfortably, we may have certain actions and intentions that are more subconscious, but we're not. If we become conscious of them, we can actually modify the way we are, our being, by being aware of all five, and making sure they're all aligned, or, there's a Baha'i term now called coherence. I think this is another aspect of coherence.
We can adjust ourselves in different zones of ourselves, so we can be in harmony with others, because that's really the ultimate goal, is to be able to sing in harmony with each other.
What I recall, the word that keeps coming to my mind is reaction. So as an individual, how you react, maybe it's not exactly what you said, but how you react to a situation, or to the environment, or to another person, is something within our control.
How we respond.
Respond or react, yeah.
Yes. Our response could be reaction. Our response could be independent of the other person, but it can be a response.
And it's within our control.
Yes, absolutely. That's a divine justice. There's someone back there.
You mentioned something about forming. There was you made a mention about, when we were talking about love me, love thee, you were talking about how you build this foundation at age 4, because by age 8 you're saying it's too late. And I missed that, unfortunately. I'm sorry. I was wondering if you could just 30 seconds give a brief review of what that was with a child.
But to make it very brief, is parents often become fixated on the bottom line. Let's say they want the room to be clean, so the room to be clean becomes the object of their focus. They want the room to be clean. It doesn't matter what happens in the relationship of the parent and the child. And if that relationship becomes completely distant and angry and disconnected, they don't care. They want the room to be clean. So what I'm saying is watch out, because that relationship, being very connected and very two-way, don't cut the cord by insisting on the room to be clean. After all, that's a material thing. That is a side object. The real object is for you to be able to always have an open door to the heart of your children. So when the time comes that you really are going to want to have to influence them, you're going to be having a connection.
So how do you fix it?
How do you fix it?
How do you discipline them?
Yeah.
How do you discipline them?
That is the art of being loving and being firm. Adds a balance that parents need to learn. It's a training, it's a learning. It's like you go and you apply for a job. Your job requires that you talk with your colleagues, right? With certain boundaries, but at the same time be very loving. You don't go, nobody goes to the job and start yelling and screaming and acting as a one-sided master. We don't do that, do we? We don't. I mean, the police guy comes and tells us, runs after us. We pull aside, right? And we politely sit over there, and we don't come out of the car. We don't slap him, we don't yell at him, we don't scream at him. We just very politely, I mean, our manners. Sometimes the kids can say, oh, I don't do it like that, or my mom can act like that. So we say, yes, sir, what happened? And he says, did you notice that you passed a stop sign? And I know this parent is one of a friend of mine. She said, she has a sense of humor. She says, well, yes, sir. I noticed I passed the stop sign. I saw the stop sign. I didn't see you. So the police laughed. I mean, he had a good sense of humor. So we need to get into that mindset that we don't take our children, even when they're little, for granted. From the very beginning, we learn the art of setting the limits, but kindly. So, and takes practice and patience and repetition, a lot of repetition. So, you say, you know how Mary Poppins, you guys watch Mary Poppins, the show, how he got the kids to do the room cleaning. She got into being creative, singing a song, making it into a game. You want the experience of interaction with you as a parent to be pleasant, at the same time instructing and guiding. And that's an art. Otherwise you lose interest. Because human mind is very capable of blocking you, even though you're sitting in the same space. They block you. It's not bad when they're little, because they're at your mercy. It's horrible when they're older, because when they block you, they let all the other influences in, but yours, and you have no access to it. Human mind, Baha'u'llah makes a very big deal out of the power of the will. That's that hidden word, love me that I may love thee, has to be a warning and a guide to all of us. That God says, if you don't love me, there's no way I can reach you. And then how as parents we can take that for granted that, oh yeah, just because I'm a parent and I provide the food and whatever, and I'm called a parent, that I'm going to have access to this person's heart. They will let you, they might even obey you, they might even do what you say, but they won't let you in. That's not good. Does that make sense? So focus on the relationship. Don't lose the relationship at the price of what you can just say. Treat this relationship with a great deal of sacredness, because it's sacred.
I think there's a lot of tools for being kind and firm at the same time. You know, sometimes we think we have to either be kind or firm, but actually being kind and firm at the same time is possible. Like, you know, when there's a need to correct, that you connect first, connection before correction. So, you know, I love you, or I really care about you, or I see how angry you are, connecting with their feelings, validating those feelings, and saying, and it's also, I see that you really wish you could stay and play here. And it is time to go. So, and giving maybe a limited choice. Would you like to go in 5 minutes or now? Or would you like me to, hold your hand, or do you want to walk by yourself? I mean, that's more for younger kids, but when you empathize, then you state the limit, and then you give a choice. That's one way. And I think another thing is just to really listen. Kind and firm is all about mutual respect, right? It's respect for the child and also for yourself and the needs of the situation. So if you can do things where you hear their perspective. Another great tool is having family meetings every week where you get the chance to consult, you listen, people share, you encourage and you do some compliments, and then you have a chance to hear people's points of view on certain concerns that have come up for the family, and everyone gets to brainstorm together. There's a lot of tools for kind and firm at the same time. So you are still respecting the fact that something needs to be cleaned up or done. It's not that, but also recognizing that you want to maintain that connection.
What the skills learning the parenting? I remember years ago when I was doing parenting, and this was at the end of the parenting session, I invited a whole bunch of high school students. So they could tell the parents at the end of the whole training, what are some of the things that they really like from their parents, or some of the things they don't like from their parents. It was really very eye-opening. So what did I still remember, they told their parents, they said, we don't listen, we don't hear you, what you say all the time. We block you. But we will never miss how you act. That's what their wisdom was. So watch what you do. So but when you say do this or do that, or whatever you're giving them advice, they might be somewhere else. But they said, we will never miss how you act. Anything else that you remember from yesterday? Well, this is wonderful.
One thing I remember from yesterday that I think is important that you mentioned was, and it was kind of in passing in a story that you said about your child, but the need to calm down first before responding to a situation, that in the heat of the moment, it's not the time to resolve the conflict,
Yes.
that everyone needs to be calm,
Yes.
and then you can problem solve. And when everyone's upset, it just ends up being threats, or, so taking that time to calm down before engaging is really key.
So important to be a vehicle that you're safe with yourself. If you're not safe with yourself at the moment, that means your emotions have hijacked you, that is not the time to talk. I have a lot of times couples, come for counseling and they get very, very upset that they cannot say what they have to say. And I say, nobody says don't say what you have to say. You're perfectly all right to say what you want to say, but you only can say it when you are able to say it in a loving, kind, and pure-hearted way. When you're angry, when you're upset, when you feel like a victim, that's not the time. So you pause, you clean, you fix yourself, you work with yourself, you take yourself to a different sphere, and then when you're safe with yourself, and you have a spirit of loving kindness, then you can say whatever you want to say. That is very difficult for people. It's hard to feel like, because the conquering your own self and putting yourself in a place where you're no longer a victim is very difficult. It's a big task.
Are you familiar with Daniel Siegel's work?
I have been very familiar with him from the very get-go. Yes.
That's a great way to understand that.
He's trying very hard, Daniel Siegel is trying very, very hard to bring spiritual concept into the field of psychotherapy with a secular means. Impossible to do, because people are not going to be willing to surrender their thoughts to secular relationship. That's why the whole notion of faith has become so important.
But just the brain in the palm of the hand.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
your
Yeah. He he really has been fighting this battle of paving the field without becoming attacked by many of his colleagues, because initially they consider him a kind of a crossing the line of science. He's into mindfulness. So he's kind of like in a no man's land. But it's making progress, things are changing. Back and forth to the writings. The Guardian, Abdu'l-Baha all mentioned that we have the bounty of having two selves. I'm sure you're familiar with the passages. The Guardian calls it the animal self and the spiritual self, the material self, the spiritual self. Those of you who are familiar with the Star Wars, you know Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker, right? So we all have these two selves. The Chinese call it yin and yang. Have some friends over there. Hen hao, ni hao. So we have, all of us have this, the two selves. So that means our decisions come either from the Darth Vader side of us or the Luke Skywalker side of us. We gotta make sure that the Luke Skywalker has the Force. Because Darth Vader gets the Force, you know the metaphoric story, right? What was his relationship with Luke Skywalker? Huh? Yeah, exactly. He was the father. And for almost all the cultures of the world, somehow the whole role of the father is to be really about the well-being of the son. I mean, the closest understanding of what love is, in so many people have so many interesting ideas about what love is, but the closest that comes to the understanding of love within the faith is the love of a mother or father for the child. Selfless love. And wanting the best for the child. And even in that kind of a context, the metaphor of Darth Vader was he wanted to destroy the good in the son. He was so, because he was himself, he was what? He was hijacked. His inner good was hijacked until at the end. So you might watch that. It's a very fascinating, very metaphorically powerful whole series concepts that really brought this concept of dark side and the light side, the dark forces that we read in the writings, into the norm and the lingo of the people in the public. So anywhere I mention Darth Vader, Luke Skywalker, everybody knows what that is. This is very interesting. The other group that has really done a wonderful service, and I absolutely really appreciate them, is the AA group, the 12-step group. The 12-step group has been a wonderful contribution because of their universal reach, and because right off the bat they introduced the concept of a higher power. They really have paved the way for a lot of exploration and integration of psychology and spirituality, ultimately. Because addiction is a spiritual problem. It's an appetite that goes crazy. So now I want to tell you an interesting story. I like this story. For me it's almost a joke, but it's really so true. And it really shares about this whole notion of how we really need to know all these zones of our own self really well. And the greatest problem that I see exists is people confusing their thoughts and feelings together. They don't know where this whole thing stops and where the other one starts. The key is, Baha'u'llah talks about wayward thoughts. He doesn't talk about wayward feeling. So it's wayward thoughts. And that tells me that in psychology, really we need to look at the thought, and cognitive behavioral therapy really also focuses on the thought. So the feeling in some ways is the outcome of the thought. So our feeling is the result of the way we think. So changing the thought. You remember yesterday we said, you know, what is the thought of the person who looks at the smile and kind of feels uncomfortable? What do they think? Versus the person who sees the smile and they feel really very happy. What is the difference in the thought? What did the person who feels uncomfortable think about that smile?
So, what my question is about that feeling of intuition now, that like, for example, you see somebody smiling and you maybe get a creepy feeling. Was there a thought, or what does intuition play into this?
Actually, I'm glad you asked me. The research so far that we have, that people call it gut feeling or intuition or anything. Really, it is summing, unconscious summing of the way we think about things. So really, we don't have an access to a special kind of a place. So we call it intuition, and psychology, at least science of psychology, and I don't see, although Abdu'l-Baha talks about women are intuitive, but yet the science of where intuition comes from still is, we are thinking that it comes from the whole of our experiences, the way we brought up, the way we put the reality together. So it's not a source, it's not something that we have a special power somewhere that we know unknown. Because if we did, then why did we have consultation? Why do we have going to the prayers? We just sit down and intuit. So what was the thought of the person who felt comfortable? What was the thought of the person who felt uncomfortable? I just want to hear your telling me the thought. This person has a bad intention. This person has an impure intention. This person has an impure motive. It is very important that we teach ourselves and our children to articulate our thoughts. Because once we articulate them, then we can manage them. So that's why we journal. One of the reasons we journal is because when we sit down and write it, we can even draw a picture. When we write it, we become observer of our own thoughts and our own self. Then we can adjust the way we see things. We become a consultant to our own self. We become available to our own self in that way. So it's very important to articulate both thoughts and feelings and teach that to the children. You seem to be frustrated about this. You seem to be kind of annoyed, and then increasingly increase the vocabulary for that, so they can get to be able to express themselves, and rather than express themselves in an aggressive way. So, using words. So the person who felt comfortable and loving, the thought was, well, this is a nice person across the room. That's a thought. So this is a nice person, this is a friendly person across the room, produces a good feeling that you want to connect, and you smile at.
Thank you. I understand the analysis and the concept of cognitive therapy. But what I have difficulty is, how do you change your thoughts? How do you control those thoughts?
Well, I'm hoping maybe by the process as we go forward, you will see what are the means that we do it. You're absolutely right. Our thoughts are perhaps the most precious possession that we have, because our thoughts are closely related to our identity, and we're not willing to let it go. No way, Jose. Even in relation to our relationship with Baha'u'llah, we hang on to our thoughts a lot of times. We just don't let go. We negotiate, we argue, we try to convince him we are right, so exactly. So our thoughts is very precious to us. And that's why a therapy process with the Baha'i therapist, for example, who includes and incorporates the writings, is a triangular relationship. It's not a twosome relationship. So the relationship is just like a marriage, actually. The relationship is not a tit-for-tat kind of a thing, but there is a relationship both with this source of illumination and adoration. So if the therapist succeeds in bringing you closer to the point of your own adoration, then that outcome is good. And people are a lot more willing to surrender their thoughts to this point of adoration than to this other person sitting in front of them. So this guy, just to understand this story, this guy is a very, very good mechanic, really excellent mechanic. And he has this vintage car, and he knows how to fix this car. And he's so proud of it, and he just takes it out and shows it off and everything. And this morning, he wakes up and he goes and turns the key and he goes, nothing, no sound. The music to his ear is not there. What's he thinking? Uh-oh, that could be a thought. Uh-oh. How is he feeling?
Upset.
Upset. I will repeat it for the people in the other room so they can hear the jumping and the thing. So I'm going to repeat their words. Upset. What else?
Concerned.
Concerned. What else?
Frustration.
Frustrated. What else?
This is the mechanic who's thinking.
This is the mechanic.
Yeah.
How about
Confused.
Confused. What else?
Fearful.
Afraid. That is a very powerful feeling that almost a lot of times, especially under anger, that fear is lingering underneath of that because it justifies a lot of force in us when it's there. So always watch for that hiding underneath of places. It's like a snake. So yeah, fearful that the car is the end of this car maybe. And then what does he want to do? Fix the car, and what does he do? He starts pulling the hood, looking here, looking there, doing whatever he can that he can think of. Googles it, YouTubes it, and the car does not go. After a couple of hours of battling with the car, what is he thinking? Huh? Tow truck, very good. So I need to take it to someone, maybe someone knows better. And what's he needing?
Defeated.
Huh?
Defeated.
Well, is he defeated? Because he's doing something in the direction of fixing it. Generally, if a person is not taking action in the direction of fixing it, is what? Feeling?
Hopeful?
Hopeful, yes. So there is hope. So, thanks, Valerie. And so what is his intention? To get it fixed. And what is his action? He gets it in a whatever, tow truck, calls the tow truck, calls the AAA, whatever it is, and he remembers now a friend that is excellent, and he also has a vintage car, so he wants to take it to him, right? So he goes to the friend, and he tells him, he says, Jim, Joe, whatever, you know me, and we both work on cars, and you know how good I am in fixing my car. But this morning, no matter what I have done, I've done anything I can, the car is not going. Can you do anything about it? Joe comes and takes a look at the car, and he thinks, yeah, I can do it. He's feeling pretty confident, and he wants to help his friend. And he says, yeah, I think I can do it. Oh, wow. This man hears, I think I can do it. What is he thinking now? Great. Thinking, not feeling. Thinking.
Enthusiastic.
This seems like it might work. This is thinking. Happy is the feeling. So this might work. Maybe there's hope. He's feeling hopeful, happy, encouraged, and all of those things, right? And his intention is give it to him to do it. His intention is, yeah, please. And his action is, please, Joe, go ahead, take care of it. Before he does it, he says, how much are you going to charge me? He's thinking, oh my goodness, there are going to be several $1,000s coming my way, right? Says, how much are you going to charge me? He says, the friend says, oh, not so much, because you're a friend. $100. What does he think when he hears that?
Grateful.
What does he think? That's feeling.
Oh, that's great.
That's great, exactly. That's wonderful, that's great. That is cheap, that's a thought. That's cheap, that's nothing. What's he feeling? Very happy? Huh? Relieved, happy, what else?
Lucky.
Lucky, he feels lucky, and he wants to give it to him right away. And he's actually, go for it. And he's standing there wondering what he's going to do. Because really, he ain't done anything. So, Joe takes a look at this and he says, he takes a few steps back and comes forward, goes bam, to the front of the car, and the engine goes. And he says, my $100. The guy looks at that and he thinks, what? Are you kidding? For the kick? You're charging me $100 for a kick? He's feeling what? Cheated. Angry. Really. And he wants to argue. Exactly. Argue. He says, that doesn't make sense. You're a friend. You're charging me $100 for a kick. He says, no. I'm not charging you $100 for a kick. I'm charging you only $1 for the kick, but $99 for where to kick. So, my understanding of the whole star is we learn all these components of ourselves, our physical power, our spiritual powers, and all of those things, how they work together. So at the time when we become entangled with our own self and entrapped and captive of our own self, we know where to kick ourselves so we can get fixed. So do we fix it? And generally, we should go for the thought. That's where the culprit is. The way we think about it. That's why journaling, talking, consulting, going to see a therapist, drawing it, praying, reflecting, meditating, all of that is going to be helpful in the hope that we can find alternative thoughts. That's what we're looking for. Different way of thinking about it. That's why we have people, when they talk about hindsight. And Baha'u'llah talks about it in 7 Valleys. You guys know that, right? 7 Valleys. Where of you have read 7 Valleys? Great. 7 Valleys. So, how many of you know the story of Majnun, the crazy guy in 7 Valleys, right? So what does the Majnun, what is he after? What does he want?
His beloved body.
The beloved lady, and he just absolutely cannot live without her. So he's not eating, he's not sleeping, he's not taking care of himself, he's not grooming himself, he looks horrible, he's thin, he's really disappearing. So he's sitting home in the dark and feeling sorry for himself. And he says, finally, he says, one more time, I'm going to go out and look for a lady, right? So he comes outside, he looks horrible. 2 watchmen see him in that state. What did the watchmen think? This is a guy up to some trouble, right? Exactly. And what did the watchmen think? Worried that he might be doing some harm to somebody. And what do they want to do? Arrest him. And what did they do? Chase him. That's what Baha'u'llah says. They start chasing him. Okay. Majnun doesn't want to be arrested because he still has hope. Remember when we have hope? And that's one of the things that we don't want ever do. We never want to do something that cuts completely the hope of a person who's in a relationship. If the hope is gone, the person has nothing to lose, they're not going to budge in any shape or form. The capacity of mending and changing is gone. So making sure if it is teacher and student, parent and child, husband and wife, you always make sure that you act in a way that the other person has hope. So, Majnun has hope. He's still thinking he can find Lily. So, Majnun looks at these two watchmen chasing him. What is he thinking? Baha'u'llah talks about it, actually. What does he think?
They're out together.
Yes, they're out to get me. And what else? Yes, that's true. What else he's thinking? These two, he says, Baha'u'llah says, he thinks that these two are the angels of death. God, how can you send them after me while I'm in this state of weakness and I don't have any energy, and you, instead of helping me, send me two angels of death? And he's feeling what with God?
Angry.
Angry at God. How many of us ever felt angry at God? Angry at God, and he wants to get away as much as he can. Now he knows he's helping him, and the only help that he has is sending two angels of death, and he is what? Doing what? Running as fast as he never ever could that he can. It's because that's our second wind, right? When we get into something really, really, really afraid and really, really worried, our powers become manifold. We can even, this grandma, actually, true story, she was backing off the car and she went over the foot of her 5-year-old grandson, and she heard this screech, and she comes out, and in horror, she lifted the van. And then the newspaper people were coming to interview her, and she didn't want to talk to her. She would close the door, she would not talk, because she just didn't know how she did it. She could not explain it. There was no way, she just could not understand it. So finally, some psychologist, whatever, had the chance later on to go talk with her. She said, I just don't know how I did it. I just don't have any explanation. Anyway. So Majnun is running. So finally he gets to a wall. And now, what does he think? This tall wall, what's he thinking? Not that you're not really, I mean, he's really complaining. He says, my goodness, I'm so weak, and now you send these two angels of death after me, and now you put this wall in front of me, what am I going to do? But he still has what? Hope. And so he's feeling scared, but that fear turns into intention, determination of having a second chance. So he starts, against his own belief, he starts scaling the wall and he jumps on the other side of the wall. Baha'u'llah says, what does he find on the other side of the wall? Layli, his beloved, having a lantern in her hand, looking for her ring. Woo, the scenery changed, didn't it? So now, looking at Layli and his beloved right there, what is he thinking?
Thank God.
Oh my God, I cannot be thankful. Those two were not the angels of death, they were Gabriel, he decides. Right? And he's feeling what? Absolutely beside himself. And what does he want to do? Prostrate himself on the ground and thank God for this undeserved blessing. Right? Baha'u'llah says then, this is where Baha'u'llah comes in, he says, if only man could see the end at the beginning, he would never, ever complain. What does it mean? Now, what is the difference between the end and the beginning? What do we discover that Baha'u'llah says we will never complain? What do we discover?
Purpose.
Purpose? What else? Faith? What else?
It was really good for us.
That was really good for me. Yes, what else?
Conquering our limits.
Exactly, we discover ourselves. We discover our part of our own real self and those spiritual powers that are within us that are basically blocked because of our own self. So we become our own barriers, as Baha'u'llah says. The story is how the process works and why in the process of life we tend to become angry and upset and then we are happy and whatever. But he's telling us that don't make judgments about every situation so fast. Be mindful that there's always the watchman somewhere that's pushing you, and that watchman, even though it appears like the angel of death, even though it appears like against your wishes, leave the door and the window open for him to work on the situation, because you might become deprived of the plan that God has for you in the way you're holding everything so tight, the way you're holding it together. So be flexible, be open, and then exactly that passage that we share in the long obligatory prayer. Do not look upon my hopes and my doings, nay, rather look upon thy will that has encompassed the heavens and the earth. This creates in us a sense of flexibility and openness to the divine will, so we are not so fixated on our own determination and knowledge and the way we think something is right and the way we think something is wrong. So basically, the world of living, our whole experience becomes outside of the box of wrong or right, which is not the faith. The faith is not about wrong or right. It's about really all different shades of gray. It's a moderation. This is the cause. This is the cause of moderation, as Rihan said many times. The cause of Baha'u'llah is about being in moderation. Within the boundaries of the principles of the faith, we practice moderation. So always, I have told my children, I tell my patients, I said, make sure you leave some room, some door, some window open for the watchman to do its work, because otherwise you're blocking him. So here what happened, my older daughter, she's a radiologist, she was doing her residency in University of Arizona. The whole department was having a lot of corruption and political problems and all kinds of things, and so somehow she decided she would do her fellowship. Also, after her residency, she would do a fellowship there. And the last minute, almost the last minute, when everything was supposed to go, the whole department fell apart. A lot of the attending physicians left, and there was no space. There was nothing for her to do fellowship. So all the positions were taken throughout the country, those of you who know. So she was really left with this process of thinking, these people did me in, feeling absolutely victim, really wanting to crawl in the way and losing her fellowship. I mean, that's serious for someone who's in medical training. So we talked on the phone. So he said, after a little bit of talk, he said, Neha, what about the watchman? Could there be a watchman in this picture? She says, Mom, there could be. So let's see. So she started applying last month. applying, and all of a sudden there was this position in the University of Michigan, a fellowship, an excellent fellowship, much better she could ever have at the University of Arizona. Wanted her bad, definitely. So she goes over there and she takes her fellowship in the cardio and upper torso, which is very rare. She becomes one of the best radiologists actually really in the country. Anybody wants her. So that the watchman, but the point was, she could have, this whole thing could have caused her a lot of grief, depression and sadness, and really a lot of nerves if she was not opening a window for the watchman. If she, off the bat, right there, she became hopeful instead of becoming a victim and full of fear and anger. So you see what I'm saying about this whole notion of knowing our own processes and always looking, this is what Muhammad says, it's in the passage, actually I have put into some of the music, I chanted sometimes. He says, nothing save, one of the kids actually read it, says, nothing save that which can profit them can befall my loved ones. But there are certain conditions in there, right? What is the word profit? Nothing save that which can profit them can befall my loved ones. Which means there is a profit in everything that happens. We might not see it, but it's there. Look for it. But the condition is you have to be in a love relationship with him. Because that love relationship really travels you and takes you and supports you to be able to travel this distance. Otherwise, you will block your own self with your anger, with your own sadness, with your own feeling sorry for yourself, you block it. So this love relationship is essential for us to be able to see the possibilities. There and there, so you want to speak to that?
So one of my favorite quotes, and it pertains to that story, is "As ye have faith, so shall your powers and blessings be."
Mm-hmm.
And is there any way you can show on here what "as ye have faith"? So is that a thought? Is that
faith it influences your thinking. So you say to yourself exactly what Paula says. You say, I wonder what is the ending of this story and how he might have something better in mind for me than what I'm thinking for myself. And you trust that. And in that trusting, your feeling remains very, very in control. You're not hijacked. Because once you're hijacked, you're not safe with yourself anymore. That's how it is.
I just wanted to add that in the hidden words it talks about that this is that which profited thee if therewith thou dost content thyself.
Yes. It's always the will. It's always the part that we play in it. So Baha'u'llah by himself does not control the whole show. We need to play into that. It's an interplay. It's a dance to be in that kind of orchestra. So now happiness generally is not every thought translated into action. Happiness is finding an elevated thought and translating it into action. Now, we have to remember that it's a very fascinating thing that has happened in this revelation versus the revelations of the past, which is to do with the covenant, actually. In the revelations of the past, it's like, you know, the child and the little child and the parent. So the parent, that's a word for God. Once the child knows the child is not going to be able to handle whatever it says to the child, you go out there and you play, do whatever you can, and put some clothes on the child. And the child goes out there and comes in, and everything is muddied and whatever. And the parent then understands. That's within the limits of the child. It's okay. Well, when it gets to be 16 and 17, there are different kind of boundaries. Now the parent has different kind of expectations. So it says, you know, I want you to be home by 11 o'clock, the latest. I'm going to count on that. In order for me to trust you, you need to be in by that time. If the child is not, they're going to have a discussion about that. So the whole nature of the relationship changes. So when you look at the whole notion of the way the divine will entrusted his teachings to mankind, at the time of Abraham, at the time of Moses, at the time of Christ, at the time of Muhammad even, he gave the revelation to man. He says, okay, there it is. You go take it, do whatever you want with it. Understand it, don't understand it, do it, change the word here, tell the stories, come back 300 years later and say it any way you want. It's a miracle that you can go to the Old Testament and New Testament or even go on and find words that exactly maybe Muhammad uttered or Christ uttered. After you leave out of this room, if you go talk to each other, what I said, I'm sure that it's not going to be exactly the same, even as insignificant as it is, because that's how our memory is. And our memory actually recreates itself constantly. Every time we tell the story, the memory changes, and we think it is the original thing, and then we fight over it. But there is no original thing to fight over. So comes the time of the Bab and Baha'u'llah, then God says this time, the goal is oneness of all humanity. And these words cannot be given to the children of man. I'm not giving it to you guys. No. Because the container that we have, completely empty container. There is nothing of self in it. So it's not going to be polluted with anything. So he is going to be a recipient of this pure life, of water of life. He will dish it out to you, he will explain it to you, you go through him. That's why when we go to the writings, we have this very fascinating balance that did not exist in the past. And the balance is, we can read the writings, all of us, can have access to them by reading it. We can even share our understanding of it, but we cannot do what? We can interpret it, but we cannot impose it on each other. We cannot impose it on each other. That means we all have the liberty to sit together and say, this is what I understand. I can come and say, oh, this is what I understand. And you can read it back and say, well, actually, this is what I understand. And that is open. We cannot impose it on each other. And that is the secret of the maturity of the Baha'i community to the level that we all can express our opinions. Our children need to learn how to share their thoughts and how to talk about their feelings in a loving way. What they want, they should be able to share it. But they cannot force it. They cannot cross the line. We as parents cannot force it either. We can convince one another. And Abdu'l-Baha talks about the ability to convince. What does convincing mean? Means you are able to win the heart of that person.
Victory is win. Victory is win in Latin.
Oh, I see.
Con
Yeah.
is win. Victory.
So exactly. So from the very beginning, we need to learn the art of convincing. Abdu'l-Baha was the master.
Question. When you say cannot convince somebody else, is that how does institutions work with that?
The question is when you're not able to.
So when you say cannot convince each other of the readings or writings or interpretations, how do the institutions come in this picture? Because the institutions have the ability of convincing or redirecting.
The institutions of the faith, spiritual assemblies, obviously can play a role in winning the trust of the friends and being able to talk with them and convince them. The auxiliary board member has had a wonderful place because they have the personal relationship, and if they really have the art of touching the heart of the friend and winning the heart of the friend and really understand how to separate understanding from agreeing or disagreeing initially so they can walk together for a little while, they play a very big role. Counselors have always played a big role. Hands and cause have always played a wonderful role in that. So as much as we can try, it would be nice to be able to win the other person. Mr. Tahir makes a very interesting, gives a very interesting story. So one of the friends came to him and said, I think Tahir said, one of the friends came and said, I've been Baha'i for only 20 years, whatever it is. I've studied the faith, I've studied a lot, but there's one thing that I cannot agree with and nobody has been able to convince me. None. Can you please listen to me and see if you can convince me? I think Tarzan was very wise and very great foresight. He says, he doesn't tell me what it is, I want to fix it. He says, have you ever thought that you could be wrong? Uh-oh. So that kind of lingered on this person's mind and he was reflecting on it. He said, you say you're a Baha'i. You say that you believe in Baha'u'llah as the manifestation of God. You can't put yourself at the same level with him. Because if it is, then you're the God of your own self. Why do you call him a manifestation? So can you ever imagine that you could be wrong? So he says some time passes and then he gets a letter from him that he decided that, yeah, there was possibility that there's something that he doesn't understand, and now he understands the wisdom of it, and it's okay and just fine and all goes well. There was a family member, his name is Ustad Ismail Ubudiyat. He said, grandfather of my sister's husband. They were pioneers in Venezuela. He's been there for 35 years. And so Ustad Ismail was a very interesting character. He was a banna, which means a builder. Very strong, tall, and at the same time, very one-sided determination, and then, you know, his word is the word. And he didn't have a lot of emotional intelligence, basically. He got angry and watch out, you know, some bull will come out. But he had great determination. So finally, he gets a chance to go to Holy Land and to see Abdu'l-Baha. At the time, Abdu'l-Baha was in prison. So he gets to Haifa, and all he wants is to know how he can get to the other side of the bay. Those of you who have been to see his beloved. He says, just tell me, where is he? How do I get there? And he's taking his clothes off in order to jump into the bay. So he said, no, you can't do that. I mean, this is a prison. You can't. You're going to get ready and all the processes. So this is the kind of person. So anyway, finally he gets the whole thing and he goes over there. He's just beside himself. He's around he's thinking, this is heaven, this prison. Ugly, smelly, no plant, no vegetation, dungeon is heaven. He thinks that's what he's happy, and he wants to be there forever. And his action is just, you know, being as well. So one day, he's walking around, and he hears one of the servants comes and whispers in the ear of another friend who's around him and says that in 5 more days, sir, you need your time for staying here. The prison is come up, so you need to back up and go. Ustad Ismail hears that and he thinks, how dare he be the angel of death? And he's feeling very what? Angry and fearful, really inside, fearful that they're going to come and say the same thing to him. And he wants to make sure that that doesn't happen. So what he does, right away he grabs the neck of this person, starts squeezing him, almost suffocating. He says, don't you dare, are you the angel of death or something like that? How dare you to be bringing this news? Don't you ever come and tell me something like that. I'll kill you. The guy is so afraid, he's so scared. He just says, why? I'm not saying it, it's not me, it's the beloved. The beloved is really telling you who it is. So he says, well, tell the beloved, he has to tell me himself. So the guy said, okay. He goes to Abdu'l-Baha and said, I'm not going to deal with those other side. He just almost killed me. Abdu'l-Baha didn't say anything. So come the time when all the friends gather around each other and Abdu'l-Baha, and here is Abdu'l-Baha as he did. He's talking about himself and he's asking them questions. They're supposed to, they're supposed to have some questions. So as his turn asks his question. He says, you know, my beloved, I have one request. My mother, when I became a Baha'i, my mother was a very devout Muslim, and she thought that I really left heaven. I threw myself into hell, so she would go into the yard and she would beat her chest, and she would, you know, curse me for what I had done, left my religion. She said, could you please make sure that she's forgiven? And Abdu'l-Baha says, well, of course she's forgiven. Don't you worry, that's no big deal. And then he said, well, the other thing is, I'm not an educated person. I don't know how to teach. I have no language, but I want to do it. My beloved, I don't know what to do. Abdu'l-Baha says, don't worry, just go around and tell your story. And as you tell your story, you teach. Also, this mind is very happy. And he asked the third question. Anyway, so it comes turn time for Abdu'l-Baha. Abdu'l-Baha always is one of the people. So he shares, he says, right now they're building the Mashruq al-Asghar of Ishghabad. He shares with them his thought in the, you know, indirectly. He says they're building the Mashruq al-Asghar of Ishghabad, and I'm thinking, I'm a prisoner here. I can't go anymore. I'm not free to go. And I'm feeling so sad and deprived, so sad inside that I cannot be there. So I can mix my tears with the soil and make bricks for this Mashruq al-Asghar of Ishghabad. That scene, Ustad Ismail hears that, and then Abdu'l-Baha says, I wish that one of you could go in place of me. subconscious mind hears that, and he thinks. He doesn't even spend a moment of thinking. He just gets up, and he stands up, and he sees himself tall and standing up, and he says, "My beloved, I go for you. I go for you." And then he looks at himself and says, "Uh-oh. Did I become the angel of death for my own self?" And he said, "Well, maybe he will give me another month or two or something like that." And then he dares and says, "So my beloved, when would you like me to go?" Abdu'l-Baha says, "Tomorrow." And this is where it goes. Because where did that command come from? His beloved. This love relationship is what cuts through our sense of one-sidedness and unable to see different sides. So I leave you with that thought because Deborah gave me the command, cut the thing. So, see you after the